My fellow Americans, to start, I'd like to give a shout out to Sherry, who has been a supporter of the American Patriots. Thanks for all of your comments and encouragement. This is the third video where we turn to the framers of the Constitution to shed light on the problems that we face. They are the creators of our nation, which has stood as a shining example of democracy for 245 years, representing the hope of freedom throughout the world. Their words of wisdom have revealed where our country has fallen short and have provided guidance on what is needed to get it back on track. Today, we will once again turn to those American heroes to help us strengthen our nation and rescue it from the trouble that has spread across our land. Today, we will address economic inequality. Wealth gap. John Adams once said, "Property monopolized or in the possession of the few is a curse to mankind." The top 1% in America now hold more wealth than the entire middle class, which has never happened in the history of our nation. A family in the top 1% has a net worth that is 288 times higher than the typical family, which is also a record. The wealth gap in our country is getting wider by the day, resulting in fabulous wealth for a few and a rapidly growing number who lack the resources to meet their basic needs. This trend poses a threat to the American dream and what we stand for as a nation. This is not to say that those that start a new business and create jobs, or those that invent products that enrich our lives shouldn't be handsomely rewarded. They certainly should. However, concentrated wealth at the top causes a decrease in broadly based consumer spending, which degrades our economy and harms us all. Income gap. What makes the wealth gap worse is that high earners are seeing their wages increase much faster than everyone else's. During the last 40 years, the top 1% saw their wages grow 6 times faster than the rest of us. Our government has passed laws that make it difficult for workers to negotiate for better pay. This enables executives to enrich themselves at the expense of the working class. Alexander Hamilton has said, "In the main, it will be found that a power over a man's salary is a power over his will." In effect, the workers in America are being oppressed due to the power that their employers have over them. You've probably heard me say this before, but we need a national union to give our workers the ability to negotiate for better pay, benefits, and working conditions. Having a voice is the American way, and I'm sure that our founders would agree. Workers must not be silenced. Tax gap. The tax structure in America also makes the wealth gap worse. The wealthy have seen their taxes rolled back to a rate last seen in the 1910s, when the government was only 1/4 the size that it is today. Following the Trump tax reform in 2018, and for the first time in the last 100 years, billionaires are now paying a lower tax rate than steel workers, school teachers, and retirees. That's right. While the average American pays 13.2% of their income in federal taxes, the average billionaire pays just 8.2% of theirs. This gives the wealthy more resources to influence the government through campaign contributions and lobbying, which tilts the scales even further in their favor. John Adams said, "Government is instituted for the common good and not for the profit, honor, or private interest of any one man, family, or class of men." We need tax reform to ensure that taxes are levied based on the ability to pay. Welfare and poverty. Ben Franklin tells us that an equal dispensation of privileges and advantages is what every citizen is entitled to and ought to enjoy. Considering the poor, our welfare system helps them to some extent, but it also traps them in a cycle of poverty. If they get a job, their benefits are cut, and they actually lose more money than they make. As a result, they become dependent on the government and remain poor. Instead, our welfare system should provide incentives to escape poverty and for those who are able-bodied to become self-sufficient and experience upward mobility. Ben Franklin confirmed this by saying, "I think the best way for doing good to the poor is not making them easy in poverty, but leading them out of it. In my youth, I traveled much, and I observed in different countries that the more public provisions that were made for the poor, the less they provided for themselves, and of course, became poorer." Education. A good education is a major contributor to the financial success of any individual. It is a means to reduce the wealth gap, reduce the income gap, and raise the poor out of poverty. As a result, one of the most valuable gifts that we can give to our children is a good education. So then, how do we define good education? John Adams described it in this way: "It should be your care and mine to elevate the minds of our children and to accelerate and animate their industry and activity, to excite in them an ambition to excel in every capacity, faculty, and virtue. If we suffer their minds to grovel and creep in infancy, they will grovel all of their lives." So how does our education system stack up against those ideals? Not well, actually. Test scores in science, mathematics, and reading are lower for American students than those in countries like Canada, Singapore, Finland, South Korea, and even Poland, Macau, Estonia, and New Zealand. And of most concern, students in America score far below those in China. Without a good education, our children will never reach their full potential, and our country will face an ever-growing technological threat from foreign powers. Therefore, to excel, our schools need to compete with each other, just as athletes do in sports. Only the best will survive and triumph. To establish head-to-head competition between the schools, we need to provide parents with school of choice and vouchers. The best schools will have an abundance of applicants, but the worst schools will not survive. Once again, the founding fathers of our nation have provided the insights that we need. Interesting, isn't it, that although they lived almost 3 centuries ago, they seem to know all about the problems that we are facing today. So what do they say about economic inequality? John Adams warned that when economic power becomes concentrated in a few hands, then political power flows to those possessors and away from the citizens, ultimately resulting in a government for the few who are selfish and corrupt. Clearly, we need to act, and there's no time to lose. The prosperity and well-being of all Americans is at stake, as is the integrity of our democracy. So please join the American Patriots by subscribing to this channel. And as the small but ever-expanding group of patriots that we are reminded of our ability to set things straight by Samuel Adams, who said, "It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men."